Egypt has forever been a territory of enigmas. But occasionally, something emerges that is so peculiar, so entirely unforeseen, that it compels archaeologists to doubt everything they believed they grasped about the ancient realm. And in 2024, that instant occurred. Underneath the moving sands of Saqqara, a Swiss-French expedition revealed a closed tomb, undisturbed, flawlessly maintained, and concealed for more than 4,000 years. They anticipated a mummy, or at minimum the traces of a burial. Rather, the chamber disclosed no human traces, no recognizable body, and no whole coffin was retrieved after thorough plundering, only barriers. Barriers blanketed in brilliant paintings and carvings, so excellently maintained that they appeared as though they were etched yesterday. And the more investigators examined them, the more peculiar the finding grew. The tomb was owned by a man called Teti-Neb-Fu, a royal healer serving throughout the closing years of the Old Kingdom, a period characterized by political breakdown, starvation, environmental unpredictability, and expanding regional power centers. But Teti wasn't merely another palace doctor. His barriers catalogued 3 positions so uncommon that even Egyptologists battled to locate comparisons. He was a summoner of Serket, the scorpion deity linked with healing, poison, and prohibited protection ceremonies. He was overseer of healing herbs, a position documented in less than a few carvings in all of the Egyptian chronicle. And he was principal dentist, a rank nearly never awarded to a solitary person. One man possessing all 3 functions is remarkable. But what genuinely astonishes investigators is this: someone of such significance obtained a magnificently adorned tomb, yet was never interred in it. The carvings portray intricate medical formulas, plant diagrams, representations for poisons and remedies, and scenes that seem to display early surgical methods. Some formulas resemble basic disinfectants, injury treatments, or even poison neutralizers far past typical Old Kingdom healing. But dispersed between these representations are something different: damaged phrases, complete sections purposely carved out thousands of years earlier. This wasn't plundering or destruction. It was accurate, managed removal. Someone deliberately eliminated portions of Teti-Neb-Fu's labor, the precise portions handling healing herbs, poison ceremonies, and what seemed to be sophisticated healing methods. Whatever understanding was once documented on those barriers, someone desired it eliminated. And then arrives the most troubling detail of all. There is no indication that the tomb ever contained a body. No disrupted wrappings, no resin marks, no pieces of bone, no impression where a coffin once settled. It is as though Teti-Neb-Fu was never interred there whatsoever. Yet the tomb was arranged specifically for him, finished with contribution scenes, priestly representations, and a complete architectural design reserved for high-ranking members of the royal palace. This leaves only 2 possibilities. Either his body was extracted long earlier, or he perished under situations that blocked a conventional burial. Both clarifications raise more mysteries than solutions. And there is another detail the archaeologists couldn't disregard. The representation of Serket, the scorpion deity, surfaces throughout the tomb far more regularly than usual. Serket was a guardian, but she was also the deity summoned in ceremonies involving poison, toxins, and hazardous healing methods. Healers linked to her worship were thought to hold understanding that approached magical, secretive, or even prohibited. So why does the tomb of such a healer hold medical formulas intertwined with the representations of a deity linked with hazardous practices? And why were complete passages purposely wiped away? This mixture proposes that Teti-Neb-Fu may have held understanding that subsequent priesthoods feared, understanding involving poison, healing, or ceremonies regarded as too powerful or too hazardous to endure. Then archaeologists observed something even more peculiar. On one barrier, a representation surfaced that researchers had infrequently witnessed before, a blend of scorpion imagery and herb designs that don't correspond to any recognized plant varieties from ancient Egypt. These herbs may signify extinct types or materials employed only in the most limited royal settings. Some investigators now think that Teti Neb Fu may not have been simply a healer. He may have been testing, examining poisons, remedies, or ceremonies that pressed against the limits of priestly authority, which could clarify the wiped phrases, and maybe why his body disappeared. But the enigma doesn't conclude in this tomb. Comparable removals, carved, targeted, purposeful, have been located in other tombs across Egypt. Priests, healers, officials connected to protective magic, all absent the identical categories of carvings. Different people, different territories, different hundreds of years, the identical design. A particular branch of understanding was being wiped away. Teti Neb Fu's tomb is merely the most distinct illustration. A decorated chamber with no burial, understanding carved away, and a figure whose character was too significant to erase, yet too hazardous to maintain completely. This leaves a bigger, more troubling mystery. Was this royal doctor part of a concealed order, a system of healers and ceremony practitioners whose labor subsequent dynasties feared? Or did he reveal something that menaced the priesthood's authority over life, death, and healing? The Egyptian chronicle is filled with strata of censorship, but infrequently does it aim one territory so accurately. And so archaeologists departed the tomb questioning the identical mystery. Why would ancient Egyptians devote enormous resources to construct a tomb for a man they never interred? Near the entrance, one carving stayed untouched, a phrase the ancient carvers prevented. May the mysteries of circuit be closed forever underneath the sand. Mysteries of healing, mysteries of poison, mysteries of something different completely. Whatever it was, Egypt concealed it, wiped it, and anticipated it to stay interred. But the sands of Saqqara have moved again, and Teti Neb Fu's vacant tomb is only the initial fragment of a much bigger riddle, one involving absent healers, suppressed formulas, prohibited ceremonies, and unexplained designs extending across millennia. Before we descend any further into this enigma, pause to press the like button. It genuinely assists the exploration continue, and inform me in the remarks. Where in the realm are you observing from? And what hour is it right now on your portion of the tale? As always, the images are only a reference. The genuine proof lies underneath the desert sands. Thank you for being present and for supporting this channel as we reveal the forgotten realm together. This is the start of a further enigma, and it compels a closing mystery. If this is what lies merely underneath the surface, what different things are still concealed further in the sand? For nearly 1,500 years, every etched representation inside Egypt's temples and tombs was quiet. No researcher, no priest, no monarch grasped a solitary hieroglyph. The tongue perished, the significance vanished, and a civilization constructed on writing became illegible to its own descendants. But this quietness wasn't merely the outcome of time. It was designed. And when contemporary researchers finally decoded the system in the early 1800s, they found something far more troubling than a vanished alphabet. They understood that portions of Egypt's written chronicle had been purposely wiped, systematically, repeatedly, and constantly aiming for the identical categories of understanding. Everything transformed in 1799 when French soldiers revealed the Rosetta Stone. It appeared harmless initially, one communication repeated in Greek, demotic, and hieroglyphs. Researchers assumed interpretation would be straightforward. It wasn't. It required 20 years. And the reason was rapidly evident. The hieroglyphic writing wasn't identical to the Greek. The Egyptian edition held additions, phrases that elevated ordinary declarations into divine announcements, phrases that existed only in the hieroglyphic script, modifications that proposed Egypt was rewriting its own documentation for anyone who could interpret the Holy Tongue. If the official carvings were altered, what different things had been transformed? That mystery drove two men, Thomas Young and Jean-François Champollion, to break the linguistic system. Young observed that particular representations spelled foreign titles phonetically. Champollion made the closing leap, linking hieroglyphs to the final enduring version of ancient Egyptian, Coptic. On September 14, 1822, the representatives started speaking again. But what they stated was not what anyone anticipated. Across Egypt, as soon as carvings could be interpreted, a design emerged. Complete phrases in tombs had been purposely carved out. Terms, sentences, sometimes complete passages eliminated with accuracy. This wasn't destruction. It wasn't theft. It wasn't weathering. It was censorship. And the absent material wasn't haphazard. Wherever writing had been wiped, the topic was nearly always the same. Ceremonies involving healing, poison, protection, or the specialized labor of priest-healers. The precise categories linked with Teti Neb Fu, the royal doctor whose body disappeared from his own tomb. One of the most distinct illustrations arrived from Abydos, a priest's tomb that originally held a thorough medical writing, now nearly completely destroyed. What little stayed bore cautions. These terms shall not be uttered aloud. Eliminate the route that guides harm. Close what guards the spirit from what resides underneath. These phrases surface in tombs from Saqqara to Thebes, Luxor and Giza, constantly connected to understanding involving toxins, treatments, and protective ceremonies linked with hazardous deities like Serket and Sekhmet. Someone at some point didn't desire this data to endure. Why would Egyptians wipe understanding in a civilization renowned for maintaining everything? Some chroniclers think these acts were political. Healers possessed remarkable power, and suppressing them meant strengthening the priesthood. But this clarification raises a difficulty. If the objective was political authority, why wipe the understanding completely rather than rewriting it? Others think the absent material was hazardous. Formulas, mixtures, or ceremonies that subsequent Egyptians regarded too risky to maintain. This theory matches the proof more closely, but still doesn't clarify the magnitude of the removal, because the design isn't haphazard. The majority of these eliminations gather around two intervals of crisis: the breakdown of the Old Kingdom and the unpredictability of the late New Kingdom. Both periods were characterized by starvation, political fragmentation, and internal power battles, and both are recognized for sudden priestly intervention in cultural and religious matters. Something in those periods terrified the writers enough that they wiped complete categories of understanding across the territory. And then arrived the most disturbing finding of all. Throughout a restoration in Thebes, conservators cleaning a soot-blanketed barrier revealed a phrase that had been concealed for hundreds of years. Conceal the terms that unlock the entrance. Let only the sand recall. Those who pursue it must be erased. This wasn't a legend or verse. It was direction, a command to inter understanding purposely. And Egypt followed across the territory. Carvings were carved away. Titles disappeared. Ceremonies were left incomplete. Manuals were destroyed. What endured was fragmented, enough to propose that something significant once existed there, but not enough to grasp it completely. When Champollion revived the tongue after 3,000 years, the initial thing researchers observed was not what the carving stated, but what had been eliminated. The quietness was deliberate, which transports us to the central mystery no archaeologist can reply with certainty. What did ancient Egyptians understand that subsequent Egyptians were terrified to maintain? A ceremony they feared? A medical method that possessed too much power? A technology they no longer grasped? A technique of protection against something they thought existed underneath the ground? Whatever it wasn't meant for us. But chronicles infrequently stay interred. The identical wiped representations that surface in vanished medical writings also display in other peculiar locations. On the granite containers of the Serapeum, in priestly manuals at Abydos, in papyri from Saqqara, and on broken pieces near the Valley of the Kings. These marks hint at a concealed system of understanding, a framework linking healers, priests, designers, and ceremony specialists across multiple dynasties. Someone attempted to wipe it, but not completely. Enough stays to disclose the outlines of something bigger. And to grasp where this path guides, we must turn to a burial that breaks every regulation of Egyptian royal tradition, a tomb that shouldn't exist, yet holds clues connecting directly to this vanished framework of understanding. When Howard Carter revealed the tomb of Tutankhamun in 1922, he anticipated the burial of a monarch, grand, purposeful, and unmistakably royal. Rather, he stepped into something that has baffled archaeologists for more than 100 years, a royal tomb that functions nothing like a royal tomb. From the very initial glance, nothing about Tutankhamun's resting location seemed correct. The chambers were small, confined, and asymmetrical, completely unlike the monumental tombs arranged for pharaohs years, sometimes decades before their deaths. Royal burials were architectural declarations, wide corridors, big halls, careful orientations. But Tutankhamun's tomb appeared rushed, improvised, and peculiarly unsuitable for a monarch of Egypt. Its magnitude alone raised concerns. It resembled the tomb of a noble lady rather than a pharaoh. The proportions, the design, even the orientation pursued designs linked with queens, not monarchs. The burial chamber turns right rather than left, a detail trivial to contemporary eyes but symbolically huge in Egyptian early construction. This solitary detail has guided many investigators to contend that Tutankhamun was positioned in a tomb originally constructed for someone different, possibly Queen Nefertiti. If that is accurate, then the mysteries multiply. Why was the boy monarch interred in a tomb that clearly wasn't his? Where was the original planned burial for the queen? And what compelled Egypt to discard the usual royalty procedure? The more archaeologists examined the location, the more peculiar it grew. When conservators investigated the barrier paintings, they located microbes embedded in the pigment, microbes that can only develop when paint is closed before it completely dries. That means the tomb was shut while the artwork was still moist. No royal burial in Egypt's chronicle had ever been executed with such haste. Everything about the burial screamed urgency, as if Egypt had exhausted time. Artifacts inside the tomb intensified the enigma. Tutankhamun's golden covering, the most iconic artifact of ancient Egypt, does not completely correspond to his facial proportions. Some of his jewelry displays indications of having titles re-etched. His coffins seem to have been repurposed from earlier burials. Even the canopic shrine, a holy item arranged specifically for each pharaoh, bears carvings that appear added at the final instant. Reused burial items, mismatched craftsmanship, modifications made in a hurry. None of this matches the anticipated burial of a monarch. These are indications of improvisation, of a burial assembled from available materials rather than items generated specifically for royal employment. Egypt possessed the resources to arrange immaculate tombs. Yet for this pharaoh, they didn't, or couldn't. Why? Some chroniclers think the reply lies in politics. Tutankhamun reversed the radical religious reforms of his predecessor Akhenaten, who attempted to substitute Egypt's many deities with the reverence of a solitary deity, Aten. After Tutankhamun's death, priestly factions pursued to wipe Akhenaten from chronicle. In the procedure, Tutankhamun, who undid that revolution, should have been rebuilt in glory. But that's not what occurred. His title surfaces infrequently. His monuments were destroyed. His heritage was minimized. Some researchers suspect that the elderly palace official who became pharaoh after Tutankhamun, may have exploited the situation. Ice Tomb holds artwork nearly identical to Tutankhamun's, but more elaborate, proposing that the burial resources planned for Tut may have been redirected to I himself. If this theory is accurate, then Tutankhamun was pressed aside, not only in life, but even in death. And then comes the possibility that haunts investigators to this day. The buriers of Tutankhamun's tomb may not be the conclusion of the tale. They may be concealing something. In 2015, radar scans identified unusual oddities behind the north and west barriers of the burial chamber. Some scans proposed straight borders and voids, the signature of closed, undiscovered chambers. Other scans questioned these outcomes. The debate continues. But the architectural logic stays. Tutankhamun's tomb appears like an antechamber, a front chamber guiding into something bigger. If a concealed chamber genuinely exists, many think it could possess the long-vanished burial of Nefertiti, one of the most powerful and enigmatic queens of ancient Egypt. Her vanishing from the archaeological documentation is one of Chronicle's great enigmas. A concealed chamber behind Tut's tomb could clarify the mismatched artifacts, the peculiar orientation, and the rushed burial. Yet Egyptian authorities have resisted any invasive exploration. Whatever lies behind the barriers stays closed. When all the oddities are joined, the magnitude of the tomb, the rushed artwork, the reused artifacts, the mismatched creation, the political strain, it becomes impossible to disregard a troubling conclusion. Tutankhamun's tomb does not function like a purposeful royal resting location. It functions like something assembled in crisis, a placeholder, a backup scheme, a burial compelled by situations Egypt selected not to document. The genuine enigma may not be the boy monarch's death whatsoever, but what was occurring around him. Something disrupted the royal burial framework. Something compelled Egypt's most holy traditions to break. Something made the greatest civilization of the ancient realm position a pharaoh in a tomb not meant for him. That something reverberates the identical indications we've already witnessed. Absent carvings, wiped medical writings, disappeared people, disrupted burials, suppressed understanding. Tutankhamun's tomb is not merely an archaeological finding. It is the one error Egypt failed to conceal, a crack in the surface of an elaborate framework created to inter mysteries underneath sand and stone. And as peculiar as this tomb is, the enigmas surrounding it are only the start. Because further in the desert lies a pharaoh whose vanishing and damaged burial may disclose even more about the quiet crisis that formed Egypt's past. Among the more than 5,000 items retrieved from Tutankhamun's tomb, one artifact overshadows all others, the goldenetary covering. It is the representation of ancient Egypt, flawless, iconic, memorable. And yet, despite its reputation, researchers quietly prevented one troubling mystery for decades. The covering may not have been made for Tutankhamun. For a long duration, this concept was rejected as fringe speculation. But as technology improved and conservators examined more closely, the proof that emerged started pointing toward a far more peculiar truth. The initial hint was easy to overlook. The covering has pierced ears. Adult male pharaohs were not portrayed wearing earrings. Pierced ears were typically reserved for queens or young children, not for a monarch who perished at 19. If this covering had been crafted specifically for Tutankhamun, the earrings wouldn't be there. This solitary detail raised suspicion. But what investigators located next made it impossible to disregard. Contemporary imaging and forensic reconstructions of Tutankhamun's skull disclosed something unforeseen. The covering's facial proportions, the jawline, the cheeks, even the eyes, do not correspond to the boy monarch's actual organization. Yet they orient far more closely with representations of another royal figure. Nefertiti, a queen of remarkable political power, a lady who may have governed as pharaoh, and a figure whose tomb and mummy have never been located. The concept that Tutankhamun was interred wearing Nefertiti's covering once appeared unthinkable. Then the material proof emerged. Quietly, fragment by fragment. One of the most disclosing clues arrived from the gold itself. The covering is not made from a solitary category of gold, as one would anticipate for a royal commission. The face is crafted from a purer, reddish-toned gold. The remainder of the covering employs a different mixture with a yellow shade. These two categories of gold were sourced differently, labored differently, and based on implement marks, made at different durations. A solitary item for a solitary burial should not appear like this, but an altered covering, a covering repurposed from an earlier royal burial, would. The face seems older than the remainder, older than Tutankhamun, possibly older than his complete dynasty. The breakthrough arrived in 2015 when conservators examining the covering after a restoration incident performed X-ray scans on the rear. Underneath Tutankhamun's cartouche, they located the phantoms of an older carving, a title that had been carefully scratched out and substituted. The original title was feminine, and the style corresponded to the royal positions Nefertiti employed throughout the subsequent years of Akhenaten's reign, when she may have been acting as co-regent or governing in her own right. This meant the covering was not merely a queen's decoration. It was the eerie covering of a lady who possessed pharaonic power, the rarest status a lady could accomplish in Egypt. The face, with its delicate contours and elongated eyes, was likely crafted to signify her. Tut's title was added subsequently. Even the renowned plaited beard tells the identical tale. Its attachment points don't match the curvature of the chin. The welding doesn't correspond to the face. The beard itself is masculine, contradicting the feminine origins of the covering. All proof indicates it was added hastily, a final instant effort to make a queen's artifact appear suitable for a monarch. These clues match seamlessly with the rushed nature of Tutankhamun's burial described earlier. A sudden death, limited duration, a tomb not constructed for him, and a team compelled to assemble a royal burial employing whatever high-status items were available. Historical setting strengthens this interpretation. Egyptian tradition permitted only 70 days to inter a pharaoh, the duration of the mummification procedure. Tutankhamun perished unexpectedly. Workshops didn't possess duration to commission a fresh covering, especially one of such intricacy. If Nefertiti's burial equipment had been arranged in advance, and if political chaos pursued her vanishing, then her unnecessary covering would have been the only item ready for immediate employment. This clarifies everything: the mismatched materials, the incorrect facial features, the feminine aesthetics underneath the masculine additions, and the modified carvings. But it also guides to a far further enigma. If Tutankhamun employed Nefertiti's covering, then where is Nefertiti's genuine burial? Where is her covering? Where is her body? The vanishing of both mirrors a broader design witnessed across the Egyptian chronicle, the deliberate elimination of titles, items, and people whose existence complicated political narratives. Nefertiti's removal orients eerily excellently with the wiped medical writings, the absent people, and the disrupted burials from the identical period. There are several possibilities. Her burial may lie concealed behind Tutankhamun's barriers. She may have been interred elsewhere in a tomb not yet found. Her body and burial items may have been dismantled after her fall from favor, or her death and burial may have been purposely hidden. None of these scenarios are comforting. All of them indicate a sudden breakdown in royal succession and a scramble to regain authority. When all the proof is joined, the conclusion is difficult to prevent. Tutankhamun's iconic golden covering was not generated for him. It was a recycled relic of another ruler, nearly certainly Nefertiti. This raises a much bigger mystery. What was occurring inside Egypt at the conclusion of the Amarna interval that compelled the kingdom to reuse one of the most holy items ever generated? What crisis was so urgent that it reshaped burial traditions, wiped carvings, quieted medical understanding, and reshuffled royal characters? The covering is not merely an artifact. It is a symptom, a clue pointing to an instant of chaos that Egypt did not desire maintained. An instant that keeps resurfacing in wiped phrases, modified artifacts, absent burials, and unexplained openings in the historical documentation. And this design only intensifies when we investigate the deaths linked with Tutankhamun's finding, a sequence of occurrences that made the realm think an ancient curse had awakened underneath the desert sands. When Tutankhamun's tomb was unlocked in 1922, the realm reacted with fascination, disbelief, and then fear. Newspapers printed dramatic headlines about a pharaoh's curse, asserting that anyone who disrupted the boy monarch's burial would face deadly consequences. Researchers rejected all of it as superstition, but within months, the design of peculiar illnesses, sudden deaths, and unexplained incidents surrounding the excavation grew impossible to disregard. And the more closely you investigate the occurrences, the more difficult it grows to clarify them away with simple coincidences. The initial shock arrived from Lord Carnarvon, the wealthy patron who funded Howard Carter's excavation. Only a few months after they unlocked the burial chamber, Carnarvon perished unexpectedly in Cairo. Officially, the cause was a mosquito bite that grew infected. But the progression of the illness didn't make sense. The infection spread with unnatural speed. His fever escalated within hours. His health broke so rapidly that doctors couldn't stabilize him, and at the precise instant he perished, witnesses reported that the lights in Cairo flickered and went out. One death can be rejected, but it didn't end there. Over the next 10 years, 6 more people linked directly to the unlocking of the tomb perished prematurely. The causes differed: respiratory failure, sudden fevers, strokes, heart complications, blood poisoning, infections with no recognizable origin. These people lived in different territories, possessed no shared environment, and no medical chronicle in common. Yet the design repeated: sudden onset, rapid decline, no distinct clarification. Skeptics contended that people perish all the duration. But statistically, the percentage was far too high to wave away casually. Even doctors at the time confessed privately that the gathering of enigmatic deaths was unusual. As contemporary science progressed, a fresh stratum of clarification emerged, one that Carter and his team couldn't have recognized. Several tombs in the Valley of the Kings, including Tutankhamun's, hold elevated amounts of radon gas, poisonous molds, and fungal spores capable of causing serious respiratory damage. Some fungal poisons located in closed chambers can trigger symptoms comparable to sepsis. Others can guide organ failure in people with compromised immune frameworks. Yet this raised a mystery that science alone couldn't reply. If these poisons were responsible, why did they affect some people but not others? Why did one member of the team fall ill immediately, while another walked in and out of the tomb for weeks with no issues whatsoever? The ancient Egyptians appeared aware of something. Tomb carvings across the territory include cautions, not constantly as direct writing, but programmed in symbolic scenes suggesting that death would arrive swiftly to those who disrupted the deceased. Tutankhamun's own burial equipment holds protective spells summoning deities linked with vengeance, poison, and retribution. And peculiarly, the symptoms documented in some of the contemporary deaths resemble the identical hazards summoned in those ceremonies: venom-like reactions, respiratory breakdown, sudden infections. Coincidence, maybe. But the design didn't stop. Arthur Mace, a key member of Carter's team, developed severe respiratory difficulties and perished unexpectedly. Doctors battled to recognize whether the cause was poisoning, pneumonia, or an unusual infection. Today, some medical investigators think his symptoms correspond to exposure to Aspergillus flavus, a deadly fungus located in several closed Egyptian tombs. Once inhaled, it can cause fatal organ failure, especially in people weakened by stress or fatigue. Still, not everyone exposed to the fungus perished. Again, only particular people suffered. Meanwhile, Howard Carter, who devoted more duration inside the tomb than anyone different, lived for 17 more years. His endurance is often presented as the ultimate proof against a curse. But Carter himself was never completely transparent. He grew more reclusive in his subsequent years, declined medical examinations, and guarded particular details about the tomb with unusual secrecy. After his death, small items from Tutankhamun's burial, items that should never have departed Egypt, were found among his personal belongings. Some think Carter endured because he entered the tomb gradually, permitting his body to adapt to the poisons. Others think he didn't trigger whatever symbolic protection the burial ceremonies were meant to activate. Carter constantly insisted there was no curse, but he also prohibited unnecessary visitors from entering the tomb, even after the excavation was finished. One of the most peculiar occurrences happened far from Egypt. On the night of Carnarvon's death, his dog in England reportedly howled, broke, and perished instantly. Different continent, different environment, the identical instant. Scientifically impossible to verify, yet difficult to reject completely. And this design of peculiar reactions wasn't limited to Tutankhamun's tomb. In Saqqara, Luxor, and Giza, archaeologists laboring in closed chambers reported sudden nausea, fevers, hallucinations, breathing difficulties, disorientation, and enigmatic infections. Many of these symptoms correspond to exposure to poisonous mold, ancient pathogens, or hazardous chemicals employed in embalming. Yet some tombs also hold carvings cautioning of maladies no doctor can heal, or spirits of the West prohibited to the living. Egyptians possessed no concept of radiation or microbial poisons. But somehow they etched cautions that accurately describe hazardous environments thousands of years before contemporary science. How? Science can clarify the existence of radon, mold, low oxygen, or embalming chemicals. But science cannot clarify the timing of the deaths, the selectivity of the victims, the peculiar synchronistic occurrences, or the uncanny orientation between ancient cautions and contemporary consequences. It is possible that the Egyptians grasped the hazards of closed spaces in ways we don't completely appreciate, joining environmental awareness with symbolism and ceremony to generate a version of protection far more advanced than superstition. Cautions we disregarded. Cautions Carter's team triggered. Cautions constructed into a burial that may have been created to guard something far more significant than one young monarch. Because Tutankhamun wasn't the only one the tomb was constructed to defend. The designs point toward something different, something connected to the absent carvings, the modified covering, the wiped ceremonies, and a crisis Egypt declined to document. The deaths were never a mystery. They were the symptoms. The genuine mystery is what the tomb was protecting. And to grasp that, we must turn to a ruler even more enigmatic, one whose body vanished completely, leaving behind one of the most damaged and enigmatic burial complexes in Egypt's chronicle. Among the powerful rulers of Egypt's 18th dynasty, one monarch nearly disappeared from the historical documentation. His title was Thutmose II, a pharaoh whose reign departed so little behind that for decades archaeologists could barely verify where he was interred, what he constructed, or how firmly he ever possessed the throne. He governed only a brief duration. He commissioned nearly no monumental labors. His carvings are scarce, dispersed, and incomplete, and his recollection was overshadowed by giants. His father Thutmose I, a warrior monarch. His wife Hatshepsut, who became pharaoh in her own right, and his son Thutmose III, the empire constructor recognized as the Napoleon of Egypt. For a long duration, archaeologists thought Thutmose II's burial had been completely vanished. Then, in 2022, everything transformed. An Egyptian-British team laboring deep in the Theban range revealed a descending passage concealed underneath rubble and sediment. Initially, they assumed it was owned by a royal lady. Its location corresponded to the cemetery where wives of Thutmose III were interred, and it occupied close to Hatshepsut's early tomb. But as the team pressed further, the tomb started to defy expectations. The slope of the corridor was unusually steep. The plaster on the barriers bore scars of violent water damage. The entrance had been closed not with ceremonial stonework, but with debris, an indication of emergency, not ceremony. Many chambers had broken or were filled with thick strata of ancient mud. This wasn't a tomb carefully arranged for eternity. It was a tomb struck by disaster. Through an opening barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, archaeologists reached the burial chamber. What they located inside compelled them to rethink everything they understood about Thutmose II. The chamber was vacant. No coffin, no sarcophagus pieces, no burial items, not even broken pottery. A monarch's tomb should be filled with ceremony items, jars, linens, amulets, literary writings. Even robbed tombs hold debris, smashed artifacts, damaged barriers, pieces departed behind. But here, nothing. The elimination was purposeful, careful, and finished. Someone entered the tomb long after the burial, not to steal treasure, but to eliminate the pharaoh himself. The mystery is, why? Strata of sediment inside the corridors provided one clue. The tomb had been constructed directly underneath a natural waterfall. Shortly after the burial, a disastrous flood tore through the chambers, destroying barriers, destabilizing ceilings, and threatening to ruin the mummy. Priests were compelled to etch a second tunnel to access the body safely. Once they retrieved the traces, they moved them elsewhere, likely to guard them from additional breakdown. And indeed, the mummy of Thutmose II was eventually located in the 1900 years, concealed far away in the royal cache of Deir el-Bahari, interred hundreds of years after his original tomb had been compromised. This clarifies why the tomb was vacant. But it does not clarify why it was constructed in such a vulnerable location, nor why the burial pieces inside it tell a far more peculiar tale. Despite the flood damage, archaeologists retrieved marks of painted blue stars from the ceiling, typical of high royal burials. They located yellow celestial representations, pieces of the Book of the Amduat, and fragments of ceremony statues. These are the decorations of a pharaoh, not a minor figure. So why does a tomb with such prestigious artwork appear like it was discarded in panic? Flood water can break a chamber, but it cannot reorganize a tomb. It doesn't eliminate coffins, amulets, or jars. People accomplish. Someone, sometime after the burial, entered the tomb and cleared it methodically. Their motive stays unknown. And merely as troubling, some representations in the tomb seem scraped away or damaged deliberately, comparable to the wiped carvings in the tomb of Teti Nebfu and the fragmented medical writings from Saqqara. It proposes a coordinated design of elimination, not a haphazard disaster. Thutmose II also lived in a politically volatile instant. His reign was wedged between powerful and competing factions, supporters of Hatshepsut, supporters of Thutmose III, and conservative elements who declined the concept of a female pharaoh completely. Any burial linked with him could have become a political target. Maybe his traces were moved to guard them. Maybe they were wiped to weaken a claim to power. But political battle alone cannot clarify the representations scratched away, the absent phrases, itinerary writings, or the links to ceremony removal designs witnessed elsewhere in the 18th dynasty. Archaeology proposes something further, something involving understanding or a crisis that menaced the priesthood's authority. Even the construction adds to the enigma. The creation of Thutmose II's tomb does not correspond to typical early 18th dynasty organizations. Its features resemble subsequent, more secretive royal burials, nearly as if the tomb was reconstructed, repurposed, or altered after the flood, or after something different that stays invisible to the historical documentation. Some Egyptologists now think the tomb may have been built, discarded, reused, modified, and evacuated, all within a brief window of duration, a sequence of occurrences that possesses no precedent in Egypt's usually well-organized royalty framework. Egypt did not improvise burials, not unless something went catastrophically incorrect. Thutmose II's disrupted tomb, wiped carvings, absent burial items, and relocation orient flawlessly with the identical design witnessed in other unexplained cases. The absent healer, the censored medical writings, and the oddities surrounding Tutankhamun's burial. Each instance displays indications of disruption, intervention, and managed removal. These are not separate occurrences. They are linked. And whatever caused this design appears to reverberate across hundreds of years, surfacing whenever prohibited understanding, ceremony hazard, or political unpredictability menaced the structure of the new kingdom. If Thutmose II's burial was stripped, modified, or concealed, then the next mystery is obvious. What was occurring throughout this interval that Egypt did not desire to recall? The reply may lie not in a royal tomb whatsoever, but in a location far more peculiar. A vast underground necropolis filled with colossal granite containers etched with a level of accuracy that contemporary designers still battle to clarify. To grasp the next step in this enigma, we must descend into the Serapeum of Saqqara. Underneath the sands of Saqqara lies one of the most peculiar archaeological locations in all of Egypt. It isn't a pyramid. It isn't a royal tomb. And it doesn't resemble any conventional burial ground recognized from the Egyptian chronicle. It is a long, quiet labyrinth etched deep underground, a location possessing 24 colossal granite containers, each one so enormous and so accurately designed that contemporary specialists still battle to grasp how they were generated. This is the Serapeum of Saqqara, and nearly nothing about it matches the tale Egyptologists have been stating for more than 100 years. According to the traditional clarification, these enormous containers were meant to possess the mummified traces of Apis bulls, holy animals revered as living manifestations of the deity Ptah. But here is the initial difficulty. The containers are far too big. An Apis bull weighs around 1.5 tons. The granite containers weigh 70 to 100 tons, with lids alone reaching 30 tons. The interiors are big enough to possess several bulls simultaneously. Yet not a solitary finished bull mummy has ever been located inside. Only occasional pieces, bones, scraps, fragments. Nothing that justifies the magnitude or accuracy of the containers themselves. If they were merely animal coffins, why etch them with such designing mastery? The accuracy of the labor astonishes contemporary designers. Each container was etched from a solitary fragment of granite or diorite, stones harder than iron. Yet the barriers are polished to near mirror smoothness. The internal angles create flawless right corners. The lids match so tightly they generate nearly airtight closures, and the markings on the stone are inconsistent with the copper implements typically assigned to ancient Egyptian craftsmen. To accomplish workmanship like this today, we would employ diamond saws, laser orientation frameworks, and industrial milling machines. But the constructors of the Serapeum departed with no implements, no workshops, and no clarification. Egyptologists state the reply is skill and duration. Designers state the reply does not correspond to the proof. And then there's the physical space. The tunnels are barely wider than the containers themselves, etched deep underneath the desert with narrow turns and sloping passages. If teams of laborers pulled the containers with ropes, as conventional theories propose, they would have possessed nowhere to exist, nowhere to maneuver, and no mechanical frameworks to assist them. No ramps, no scaffolding, no lifting platforms have been located. The logistics are impossible to reconcile with the traditional narrative. Inside the chambers, archaeologists located marks of the method employed to position the containers. The chambers were once filled with sand. The granite containers were slid across it, then lowered into location as the sand was gradually eliminated. This clever technique clarifies the closing positioning. But it accomplishes nothing to clarify how the containers were moved into the tunnel framework in the initial location. To complicate things further, excavators found ancient wooden winches lying near some of the chambers. These apparatus, far too small to move items even a fraction of the container's burden, appear symbolic rather than functional, as if positioned there for ceremony intentions, not designing. This raises the possibility that the Egyptians understood how to position the containers, but whatever technique they employed to move them has disappeared from the historical documentation completely. Some investigators propose a different approach completely, one rooted in material science. Granite holds quartz, a mineral capable of producing electrical charge when subjected to pressure, vibration, or heat. Inside closed spaces with gases constructing up or temperature moving, these containers could theoretically create electromagnetic or acoustic effects. A few lids were located slightly displaced, as though internal pressure had compelled them upward. Not broken, merely moved. It raises the troubling mystery. Were these containers ever meant to possess bulls whatsoever? Or were they created to hold something different? Something that produced pressure, gas, or heat? Something the priests desired closed within the granite itself? Chemical examinations intensify the enigma. Residues inside particular containers do not correspond to materials employed in bull mummification. Rather, they include unusual resins, unidentified organic elements, and dim marks of what may be fermentation byproducts, materials that generate gas expansion and thermal reactions across duration. The precise situations that could enhance the quartz-rich granite's energy properties. If these containers were not coffins, could they have been a portion of some ceremony, experimental, or technological procedure? Egyptology does not possess a reply. What is recognized is that the serapeum did not function throughout a solitary interval. It was expanded multiple durations throughout the Old Kingdom, the New Kingdom, and even the Ptolemaic period. Each expansion extended the tunnels further underground, and each fresh section displays indications of secrecy: closed entrances, blocked passageways, concealed alcoves, and an eerie absence of carvings. Egyptian tombs were typically blanketed in writings and imagery, but the serapeum is nearly completely quiet. That quietness speaks powerfully. It proposes the location was not planned for public access. Its function was managed, limited, and possibly concealed from all but a select group of priests. A burial ground for bulls does not require such secrecy, but something different might. When you stitch the clues together, the oversized containers, the impossible accuracy, the absence of finished burials, the chemical residues, the near-complete quietness of carvings, the repeated closing and expansion, one conclusion grows difficult to prevent. The serapeum was never a simple storage location for holy animals. And the more you compare its oddities with designs witnessed elsewhere in Egypt, the wiped carvings, the absent healer, the recycled items, the rushed burials, the more the serapeum matches into a bigger system of secrecy and suppressed understanding. This underground complex is not a separate enigma. It is a portion of a framework created to conceal, limit, or hold data that Egypt did not desire widely recognized. And as peculiar as the serapeum is, the next enigma reaches even further into the ancient realm. Because contemporary technology has started to disclose mysteries locked within the mummies themselves, findings displaying that the Egyptians grasped the human body in ways no one anticipated. To pursue the path, we must appear directly into the bodies of the deceased. For thousands of years, Egyptian mummies lay in quietness, their tails locked underneath strata of linen and resin. But today, with contemporary CT scanning, the deceased are speaking again, and what they disclose is rewriting everything we believed we grasped about ancient Egypt. Because the more scientists investigate these bodies, the more peculiar the proof grows. Some mummies display indications of medical methods far more sophisticated than their period should permit. Some bear surgical marks that appear impossible for the Bronze Age. Others hold items concealed inside their bodies, items no composed record ever mentioned, and many portray methods so unusual that Egyptologists still battle to categorize them. These findings reverberate the identical design we've witnessed before: wiped ceremonies, absent burials, unexplained technology, and understanding that someone in Egypt clearly did not desire maintenance. One of the most striking illustrations arrives from a mummy recognized as Lady Chenetee, maintained at the Field Museum. When investigators scanned her with high-resolution CT imagery, they found that her body had been rebuilt from within. Artificial eyes had been positioned in her sockets. Linen had been packed into her throat to block breakdown. Her spine had been reinforced, and her facial organization had been reshaped underneath the wrappings. These weren't cosmetic touches. They were structural designing. Someone reconstructed her body with a comprehension of anatomy far further than simple mummification would require. This wasn't routine embalming. This was a restoration, preservation, and reconstruction joint. And Lady Chenetee was not a separate case. Other scans disclose surgical methods that merely should not exist at this point in Chronicle. One skull displays carved marks around a brain tumor, proposing that ancient healers inspected or attempted to treat it. Some mummies possess healed fractures set with an accuracy comparable to contemporary orthopedic techniques, bone-oriented, carved, then reinforced with resin-founded splints. There are even hints of early dental interventions: metal wires anchoring loose teeth, gold ligatures reinforcing damaged molars. These findings are not coincidences. They display intent and expertise. The Egyptians weren't merely maintaining the deceased. They were testing on the body itself. This immediately transports us back to a troubling mystery. How much medical understanding did Egypt hold that never endured in writing? Some of the most baffling discoveries involve items positioned inside the mummies in locations no writing ever describes. Scans disclose amulets concealed behind organs rather than around them, wooden forms inserted into cavities, channels in the limbs filled with resin, even materials inside skulls that don't correspond to anything recognized from Egyptian embalming methods. One mummy held a thin metal blade laid alongside the spine, made from a metal not native to Egypt. Another possessed a ceramic fragment embedded deep in the throat, maybe to stabilize the airway for the afterlife. None of these methods surface in the medical papyri that have endured, which means either the understanding was transmitted orally, or it was purposely eliminated from the composed documentation. Both possibilities match the design we've witnessed in other portions of the Egyptian chronicle. Many mummies also display indications of what can only be described as testing: incomplete embalming procedures, selective resin application, anatomical adjustments performed only on particular limbs, incisions made at unusual angles. These are not errors. They are examinations, variations, efforts to refine or explore methods. And the timing is no coincidence. The interval in which these experimental mummies surface overlaps with several historical disruptions. The period of Thutmose II, the political chaos around Akhenaten and Tutankhamun, the absent healer Teti Neb-Fu, and widespread removal of ceremony and medical writings. Different enigmas, yes, but the identical duration frame. Chemical examination of embalming materials adds another stratum. Some resins bore antifungal and antibacterial properties more effective than particular contemporary preservatives. Others arrived from territories thousands of miles away, suggesting commerce systems or ceremony sourcing far past usual anticipations. More surprising still, an element located in several mummies resembles contemporary synthetic adhesives, requiring intricate heating and extraction methods. Egypt wasn't merely employing natural resins. In some cases, they were designing them. Yet no enduring writing clarifies how. Once again, the understanding seems to have been limited, concealed, or eliminated completely. CT scans have also revealed medical situations never anticipated in the ancient realm: arteriosclerosis, calcification, genetic disorders, bone density oddities, even indications of poisoning. Some mummies display marks of chronic exposure to poisonous materials consistent with ceremony methods, medical testing, or political intrigue. Other people suffered injuries that required advanced care: a rebuilt jaw, multiple stabilized fractures, skull trauma that had healed long before death. These are not simple embalming methods. They signify sophisticated medical intervention. All of this guides to a troubling conclusion. Egypt held a deep comprehension of the human body, far further than the enduring writings propose. And when you join the physical proof with the absent carvings, the censored medical manuals, the rushed royal burials, the modified artifacts, and the enigmatic granite organizations of the Serapeum, another design emerges. Egypt went through repeated intervals of understanding suppression. Something in the past required secrecy. Something required authority. Something they thought should not be composed down. The mummies are informing us that the suppressed understanding involved healing, anatomy, preservation, poisons, and maybe something past any of these categories. Something we still lack the vocabulary to describe. And they are only the start. Because if individual bodies possess mysteries this powerful, then what about the burial grounds created to possess the masses? What about the locations where Egypt handled not with dozens of deaths, but with thousands, or even millions? To pursue the path further, we must appear at a cemetery unlike anything different in the ancient realm, a vast burial field that may hold more than 1 million mummies. When people picture ancient Egypt, they visualize great pyramids ascending from the desert and the burials of monarchs wrapped in gold. But as archaeologists excavate further, a very different Egypt starts to emerge, one filled with organizations that disappeared, tombs that were dismantled, and cemeteries whose sheer magnitude makes no logic in the conventional tale of Egyptian civilization. This portion of Egypt's chronicle infrequently surfaces in textbooks. Yet it mirrors the identical designs we've witnessed throughout this investigation: vanishing bodies, modified burials, wiped carvings, and the quiet manipulation of historical recollection. And it starts with a pyramid that was meant to be impossible to lose. In 2008, a team laboring at Saqqara rediscovered something remarkable: the foundation of a pyramid consumed completely by the desert. For nearly 4,000 years, no one even understood it existed. It had originally been found in the 1800s, then promptly interred again by moving sands. Only its lower organization endures today, earning it the title, the Headless Pyramid. What shocked investigators wasn't its rediscovery, but the situation it was located in. The pyramid had been dismantled in antiquity, not weathered, not robbed casually, but removed apart stone by stone. Its casing blocks were eliminated. Its capstone disappeared. The surrounding chambers were stripped clean. Carvings were smashed or wiped. Burial items were absent completely. Why would Egyptians dismantle one of their own pyramids? A pyramid wasn't merely a tomb. It was a political declaration, a holy machine, a ruler's eternal character etched into the landscape. Removing it apart made no logic, unless someone desired the pharaoh who constructed it to vanish from chronicle. And the timing matters. The destruction seems to have happened throughout an interval of political unpredictability, the identical category of unpredictability connected to modified burials and wiped understanding in earlier chapters. This is not a separate oddity. It's a portion of a design. At the identical duration pyramids were disappearing, peculiar findings were emerging elsewhere. In the Valley of the Monkeys near Luxor, archaeologists revealed dozens of purposely mummified baboons. Their situation was disturbing: severe vitamin D deficiency, bone deformities, and underdeveloped musculature, indications that they had been maintained indoors for years with nearly no sunlight before being sacrificed. Baboons were holy to Thoth, the deity of understanding, writing, and concealed wisdom. Why were these holy animals confined unnaturally long, then killed and embalmed? Why does this method surface in the identical periods when Egypt was wiping carvings and suppressing understanding? The design continues. Another finding baffling investigators arrived from burials holding golden tongues, thin gold plates positioned inside the mouths of the deceased. Only a handful of mummies obtained this treatment. Yet all surface throughout turbulent periods when priestly factions were battling for authority over ceremony understanding. These golden tongues may have symbolized protection, purification, or the capability to speak in the afterlife. But their surfacing is so uncommon and so context-particular that they propose something other than ordinary ceremony tradition. The more Egypt attempted to conceal understanding, the more unusual literary methods grew. But nothing compares to what archaeologists revealed in 1996 in the El Gamus burial ground, a location that may hold one of the biggest concentrations of mummified bodies in the realm, a cemetery possessing hundreds of thousands, possibly up to 1 million mummies. The peculiar portion: nearly none was owned by royalty, nobility, or priests. These were ordinary people, men, ladies, children, wrapped in simple linen, positioned in shallow graves, and mummified through techniques that defy traditional comprehension. Conventional Egyptian mummification was expensive, a privilege of the elite. But here, something completely different happened. Many bodies were maintained through natural desert dehydration. Others display crude embalming efforts, inconsistent resin employment, incision locations that don't correspond formal methods, partial organ elimination, or simple drying without any ceremony arrangement. It wasn't standardized. It wasn't elite. It wasn't documented. It was mass processing. Why would ordinary Egyptians be mummified in such vast figures? One theory proposes a social movement promoting affordable afterlife arrangement. Another, more troubling possibility: a large magnitude occurrence compelled mass burials, a starvation, epidemic, or political disaster Egypt never recorded. The chronologies of the cemetery orient with intervals of unpredictability, foreign influence, and internal decline, periods where Egyptian writings become suspiciously quiet. Again, the identical quietness surfaces. The cemetery also holds details that don't match any nonerary tradition. Infants were interred with unusual amulets. Some adults were wrapped in woven animal skins. Others possessed their ankles bound or limbs elongated unnaturally. CT scans disclosed skulls packed with unknown materials. And a few people, although never embalmed, were interred in locations usually reserved for the elite. These clues propose two possibilities. Some bodies were never meant to be mummified whatsoever, and others were maintained according to ceremonies that existed outside the formal priesthood, ceremonies that functioned in parallel, in the shadows. The most troubling portion: there is nearly no composed documentation describing the cemetery. No carvings clarifying its intention. No administrative writings referencing its magnitude. Notary manuals connecting it to recognized ceremonies. For the biggest burial project in the Egyptian chronicle, the quietness is overwhelming. Why would Egypt conceal or fail to document a cemetery holding up to 1 million bodies? A devastating epidemic? A political purge? A mass sacrifice? A religious movement the priesthood desired wiped? No clarification completely matches. But the design corresponds to everything different we've witnessed. Pyramids dismantled. Tombs vacated. Ceremonies modified. carvings eliminated, medical understanding suppressed, and now complete populations interred anonymously. Egypt wasn't merely losing data. It was eliminating data, systematically, strategically, across hundreds of years. And what arrived next? The peculiar ceremonies involving hybrid deities, animal mummies, and prohibited understanding would press the enigma even further. To grasp it, we must appear at the burial methods that defy every regulation of Egyptian religion, and the ceremonies Egypt attempted hardest to conceal. Egypt is recognized for its pharaohs, pyramids, and monumental tombs. But underneath those familiar icons lies another Egypt, a more peculiar one, an Egypt filled with ceremony animals, hybrid deities, and dreary methods that don't match into any conventional comprehension of Egyptian religion. Some of these creatures were honored as holy, some were feared, some were maintained employing techniques that defy logic. And the instants when these unusual ceremonies surface are not haphazard. They coincide with the identical turbulent historical windows we've already explored, the intervals characterized by vanished burials, wiped carvings, experimental mummification, and unexplained designing. The more you follow these clues across duration, the clearer the design grows. Egypt employed ceremony animals throughout instants of crisis, unpredictability, or suppressed understanding. One of the most striking illustrations is the surfacing of the golden-tongued deceased. In recent years, archaeologists have revealed mummies with thin gold plates inserted into their mouths, a ceremony never described in the majority writings, never located in royal burials, and never mentioned in the priestly manuals that endure. Yet these gold tongues surface in multiple territories, from Taposiris Magna to Oxyrhynchus, from Alexandria to Saqqara. What's unusual is who obtained them. Not monarchs, not high priests, not elites. Many were ordinary villagers, people who would never have possessed access to specialized ceremonies. Why were they provided a treatment typically reserved for deities? Some researchers think the gold tongue provided the deceased the capability to speak in the afterlife. Gold was the flesh of the deities, a holy metal. Others propose purification or the substitution of damaged organs. A few propose the ceremony was meant to quiet prohibited terms or guard the spirit from powers never documented in writing. But the most troubling detail is that these golden tongues only surface throughout intervals of priestly conflict, periods characterized by power battles, understanding suppression, and religious turbulence. The identical design surfaces with another group of ceremonial animals, mummified baboons. Baboons were holy to Thoth, the deity of writing, calculation, astronomy, and concealed understanding. In many ways, Thoth was the patron of intellectual authority, the holy writer who maintained cosmic structure by resolving what should be recalled and what should be erased. When scientists investigated the baboon mummies, they found troubling details. Many animals suffered from severe vitamin D deficiency, bone deformities from long intervals indoors, stunted expansion, and tooth decay consistent with confinement. They had been maintained living unnaturally long in unnatural situations before being sacrificed and mummified. This wasn't a simple ceremony. It was managed in captivity. The embalming itself displayed experimental traits, peculiar resins, inconsistent wrapping methods, and proof that priests were examining techniques rather than pursuing established tradition. These baboon mummies gather around particular periods: the late Middle Kingdom, the early New Kingdom, and the turbulence that pursued Akhenaten's religious revolution. Intervals linked with understanding suppression and political upheaval. The animals of Thoth surface precisely when understanding was being wiped. Another enigma arrives from the scarabs, one of Egypt's most iconic representations linked with Khepri, the deity who rolls the sun across the heavens. But scarabs surface in settings that possess nothing to accomplish with solar rebirth. Archaeologists have located giant stone scarabs weighing several tons in separated desert locations, as excellently as tiny scarabs concealed inside the bodies of mummies, positioned in skull cavities, joints, or even sewn between strata of linen. Some scarabs hold carvings that combine writing frameworks. Others departed incomplete, as if the ceremony was disrupted, discarded, or deliberately departed unfinished. Scarabs inside the body make logic only if they were meant to close something, anchor something, or block something from moving. Heart scarabs were employed to cease the heart from speaking against the deceased throughout judgment. So what did skull scarabs cease? What power were the priests attempting to hold? And why do these peculiar scarab ceremonies spike throughout the identical intervals characterized by wiped understanding, absent bodies, and political chaos? Golden tongues, confined baboons, inserted scarabs. Each one reappears throughout 3 historical windows: the breakdown of the Old Kingdom, the Amarna upheaval, and the turbulent conclusion of the New Kingdom. These are the identical intervals connected to wiped medical writings, repurposed royal artifacts, disrupted burials, mass mummification locations, and the accuracy-designed granite containers of the Serapeum. In every period where understanding was managed or wiped, peculiar ceremony animals surface. This is not a coincidence. It's a response. Egypt appears to have turned to ceremony creatures when confronting threats it couldn't clarify or couldn't document. Threats involving disease, spiritual disruption, political purges, or thoughts too hazardous to maintain in writing. And the design raises an even more troubling possibility. These animals were not simply representations. They may have been implemented, instruments employed to close, hold, or counteract something Egypt battled to authority. But the most distinct proof that Egyptian ceremony crossed into the territory of designing lies not with animals, but with items, artifacts that function less like religious representations and more like machines. Because in the next chapter, Egypt ceases employing creatures and starts constructing apparatus. Egypt is recalled for its temples and tombs, the stone monuments that endured thousands of years. But concealed among those ruins are items that don't function like religious representations whatsoever. They function like mechanisms. These artifacts possess moving portions, design joints, accuracy angles, and building techniques that don't correspond to the technology Egypt is stated to have possessed. They infrequently surface in mainstream chronicle books. Yet they disclose something remarkable. Whenever Egypt faced political turbulence, religious upheaval, or a sudden break in its social structure, designed items started to surface. Not art, not decoration, mechanisms. One of the most distinct illustrations was revealed in 1954, when archaeologists excavating near the Great Pyramid found a closed pit holding more than 1,200 fragments of ancient cedar wood. When assembled, these pieces created a 144-foot solar vessel, a vessel constructed without nails, possessed together rather by an intricate tension rope framework and accuracy joinery. This was the Khufu solar vessel, one of the most astonishing fragments of ancient design ever located, each plank interlocked with the next like a high-accuracy kit. Marine designers who examined the reconstruction observed that the creation mirrors sophisticated ship constructing methods not recognized anywhere different for thousands of years. The flexibility of the rope-bound joints permitted the enormous vessel to move without cracking, a technique remarkably comparable to Scandinavian ship creation, except this predates Scandinavia's earliest illustrations by 4 millennia. And maybe the most peculiar detail: 2 more closed vessel pits stay unopened beside the pyramid. These were not symbolic items etched in stone. They were functional vessels constructed with a comprehension of physics far ahead of what chroniclers typically credit to the Old Kingdom. Why interlaboring ships? Why design them so flawlessly only to conceal them underground? If they were ceremony vessels, why make them seaworthy? Mysteries like these press Egypt closer to the border of an erased technological realm. Another peculiar artifact appeared ordinary until someone X-rayed it. Interred deep within the Metropolitan Museum of Art is a small wooden statue of Hathor, a simple devotional figure at initial glance. For decades, no one suspected anything unusual about it, but imaging disclosed a mechanical axis running from the shoulder through the torso linked to the arm. When manipulated, the arm ascends and descends, a concealed joint, a movable limb, an internal pivot framework. This wasn't accidental damage or loose wood. It was a hidden mechanism, an automaton etched inside a statue. This tiny machine proposes the Egyptians weren't merely artisans. They were designers. Someone created that motion with intention, maybe for ceremony animation, a ceremonial gesture, or a symbolic approval that only priests witnessed. Whatever its intention, it demonstrates mastery of power, movement, accuracy carving, and mechanical creation, all in the Bronze Age. And the design continues inside Egypt's tombs. Several royal burials hold proof of automatic sealing frameworks, sliding granite blocks, gravity-triggered portcullises, counterweights, and grooves created to lock chambers permanently once the burial was finished. The Great Pyramid alone features a granite portcullis framework of 360-ton blocks designed to drop into location with mathematical accuracy. These are not symbolic features. They are machines, functioning mechanisms constructed to close, secure, and guard. The tomb of Seti I holds angled ramps, concealed doors, and multi-phase sealing frameworks that required precise calculations of burden, friction, and descent rate. This type of designing wouldn't be witnessed again in realm construction until the medieval interval. Yet Egypt possessed it more than 1,000 years earlier. And past the tombs, Egypt's ceremony apparatus function less like religious artifacts and more like scientific instruments. Sistrums vibrate at particular resonant frequencies. Water clocks calculate duration employing managed flow and calibrated markers. Nilometers employ hydraulic readings to predict the Nile's flood patterns. Temple orientation implements reflect a comprehension of solar and astronomical watching. These instruments require mathematics, material science, and accurate calculation, skills that emerge most clearly throughout intervals of political upheaval and religious crisis. So why does Egypt's most sophisticated technology surface when the remainder of the civilization is destabilizing? The design is unmistakable. The solar vessel emerges near the breakdown of the Old Kingdom. The Hathor mechanism surfaces throughout Middle Kingdom unpredictability. The portcullis frameworks and designed defenses ascend in the turbulence of the New Kingdom. Water clocks and hydraulic apparatus flourish throughout environmental stress. Ceremony mechanisms surfaced after Akhenaten's religious revolution shattered Egypt's spiritual structure. Again and again, when Egypt is menaced, its technology spikes. And as soon as stability returns, the technology disappears, nearly as if it were being concealed, limited, or managed by a select few. The royal designers, astronomer priests, and medical specialists who departed nearly no composed documentation behind. When you assemble the proof from this chapter with everything we've revealed before, the wiped medical writings, the absent bodies, the reused burial items, the modified coverings, the experimental mummification, the ceremony animals, the granite giants of the Serapeum, a solitary bigger mystery ascends to the surface. If Egypt held sophisticated medical, mechanical, and ceremony understanding, and if that understanding surfaced only throughout the crisis, then what precisely were they arranging for? What power, occurrence, or threat was so significant that Egypt's most protected understanding surfaced only in instants of unpredictability, and then vanished again, interred underneath the sand? To reply that, we must step back, not into a solitary artifact or tomb, but into the complete 4,000-year design that binds these enigmas together. And that transports us into the closing chapter. After following every strand of this investigation, from disappeared healers and wiped carvings to rushed royal burials, designed granite containers, experimental mummification, mass cemeteries, ceremony animals, and mechanical artifacts, a solitary truth emerges with troubling clarity. Egypt was not merely a civilization of monuments. It was a civilization that curated understanding, managed it, limited it, and wiped it when necessary. Across 4,000 years, every enigma we've investigated points toward the identical conclusion. Egypt did not merely lose portions of its chronicle. It eliminated them. Some erasures were subtle. Some were violent. Some were designed with astonishing accuracy. But all of them were deliberate. Let's step back and appear at the design as a whole. Throughout the Egyptian chronicle, key people linked to specialized understanding vanish without clarification. The royal doctor Teti Neb Fu, a man with uncommon positions and access to powerful medical practices, was interred inside a finely etched tomb, yet his body is absent. Priests linked with poison ceremonies vanish. Officials connected to prohibited methods possess their titles carved out, their tales carved away stone by stone. Whenever understanding grew sensitive, hazardous, or politically volatile, the people who bore it were quietly eliminated from the documentation. The identical surgical eraser surfaces in the writings. Complete sections of tomb carvings, especially those involving medical formulas, poison ceremonies, protection spells, or politically charged titles, were purposely etched out. The phrases weren't weathered or deteriorated. They were aimed, pure, accurate, as if someone desired to eliminate complete branches of understanding from the historical recollection. And the timing corresponds to intervals of crisis. The breakdown of the Old Kingdom, the Amarna Revolution, the decline of the New Kingdom. Instance when Egypt's ideological center fractured, and when managing data grew essential for endurance. Burials inform the identical tale. Tutankhamun's tomb wasn't constructed for him. Thutmose II's burial was vacated. High-status officials were interred in reused coffins or repurposed chambers. Tombs were closed, modified, or even dismantled completely, like the headless pyramid, deliberately stripped of its stones, carvings, and character. These disruptions aren't haphazard. They coincide with the identical historical windows as the wiped writings, windows characterized by unpredictability, priestly conflict, environmental stress, or radical religious reform. And then we encountered the design. Whenever Egypt's political organization weakened, its most accurate and sophisticated artifacts surfaced, as if understanding previously concealed suddenly emerged. The flawlessly interlocking timbers of Khufu's solar vessel, the granite containers of the Serapeum etched with machining accuracy, concealed mechanical joints in ceremony statues, automatic sealing apparatus inside tombs, water clocks, nilometers, astronomical implements, all emerging in bursts, then disappearing again. This is not the design of gradual technological development. This is the design of limited traditions, understanding possessed by elite groups, disclosed only when necessary, and then hidden once more. Even the deceased themselves reflect this secrecy. CT scans disclose medical methods thousands of years ahead of their duration. Realigned bones, investigated tumors, rebuilt jaws, reinforced spines, dental wiring. Some bodies hold items positioned inside them for reasons notary writing clarifies. Others display proof of chemical testing or anatomical alteration. And outside the royal tombs, we locate mass cemeteries filled with hundreds of thousands, maybe a million, deliberately maintained bodies, all from people with no elite status. Techniques inconsistent with official mummification, proof of improvisation, crisis, or something Egypt never documented. Stratum by stratum, the design constructs. Egypt responds to unpredictability by closing understanding away, by wiping titles, by concealing ceremonies, by dismantling pyramids, by interring items deep underneath the desert, by eliminating complete chapters of its own tale. which transports us to the mystery no archaeologist can reply with certainty. The mystery everything we've revealed has been guiding toward. What was Egypt attempting to guard? Maybe it was hazardous medical understanding, involving poisons, toxins, remedies, and preservation chemistry so powerful that subsequent generations feared its misuse. Maybe it was a prohibited religious framework, ceremonies connected to Thoth, Serket, Aten, or hybrid worships whose influence menaced political authority. Maybe it was a bloodline of designers, specialists capable of building items and mechanisms far past the reach of common craftsmen. Maybe it was a disaster, a starvation, epidemic, or societal breakdown so severe that the priesthood pursued to wipe it from chronicle completely. Or maybe it was something still concealed underneath the sand. Radar scans of undiscovered chambers, vanished pyramids interred under moving dunes, complete cities yet to be excavated, oddities underneath the Valley of the Kings, and 90% of Egypt's ruins are still underground. Egypt didn't lose its mysteries. It interred them, meticulously, deliberately, and repeatedly. The desert of Egypt is not vacant. It is an archive, one that was meant to stay closed. And after pursuing the proof through 11 chapters, a closing realization grows evident. Egypt was not only a civilization that constructed monuments, it was a civilization that hid understanding. When data grew hazardous, destabilizing, or inconvenient, Egypt did not destroy it. It concealed it, underneath temples, underneath tombs, underneath pyramids, underneath complete mountains of sand. What we've revealed so far, the absent doctor, the wiped writings, the rushed burials, the concealed chambers, the designed granite containers, the experimental mummification, are only the pieces that escape the priesthood's authority. And that guides us to the closing, unavoidable mystery. If this is what we located in the initial few meters of sand, what lies underneath the next 100? Egypt understands. The desert understands. And one day, whether by coincidence, by excavation, or by moving dunes, the truth interred underneath the sands will ascend again. And before we continue this exploration into the erased realm, don't erase to like this video, share it with someone who adores ancient enigmas, and subscribe so you never miss what we reveal next. Your support maintains these tales living, and there are many more waiting underneath the sand.